Good evening. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On the NewsHour tonight, some of the president-elect's nominees could face steep opposition in the U.S. Senate. Will the chamber serve as a check on Trump's power or pave the way for his agenda?
National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan discusses the uncertain future of the wars in Gaza and Ukraine as the Biden administration gives way to a second Trump presidency.
I believe that our legacy has already been substantially defined on Ukraine, and it can be defined in two words: Kyiv stands.
And tensions and fears rise in Europe after anti-Semitic attacks on Israeli soccer fans.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Leonard and Norma Chlorfine, and the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation.
Two retiring executives turn their focus to greyhounds, giving these former race dogs a real chance to win. A Raymond James financial advisor gets to know you, your purpose, and the way you give back. Life well planned.
The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world, at hewlett.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. The U.S. Senate returns to Washington tonight, now facing more tough decisions about controversial nominations by Donald Trump.
That says the president-elect is also pushing to bypass the Senate entirely in confirming his key appointments. Congressional correspondent Lisa Desjardins is here to bring us up to date and take a bigger look at the Senate as a check on presidential power. It's always great to see you, Lisa. So let's start with this. What's the latest on President-elect Trump's most controversial cabinet selections?
Let's talk about two in particular for the Department of Defense and Attorney General. Let's start there with Matt Gaetz, the controversial nominee for Attorney General. We know a little bit more about him. A Florida attorney says he is representing two young women who saw Gaetz having a sexual encounter with a woman who was 17. Gaetz himself has denied any wrongdoing. He's saying he has been politically persecuted and targeted in all of this. But there is an update on the House ethics report for that long investigations that the House had on this exact incident. That committee meets this week. And the chair of that committee, a Republican, has said that Speaker Johnson, who has said he doesn't want them to release the report, he said that that word shouldn't affect the committee's decision. Will it or won't it, we don't know. But the ranking Democrat on that committee, Susan Wild, has said it should be released. They are going to decide this week whether it will be publicly released. Now, let's talk about the Department of Defense nominee, Paul Hegseth. There, separately, a lawyer for him has said that he did pay a woman a settlement after they had a sexual encounter. That lawyer says it was consensual. But we also know that he was investigated as a part of this for sexual assault, but never charged in that case. Now, we raise this because now senators are raising it as well. Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin has said that this could derail that nomination. And just in the past few minutes, there's news on a third nomination, the Department of Transportation. We know that President-elect Donald Trump says he is nominating Sean Duffy. He is a Fox News contributor, also a former prosecutor and someone well-known on social media.
Let's talk about the Senate and the way the system is designed to have the legislative branch be a check on the executive branch. But also the Senate has the sole power to confirm a president's appointments, those appointments that require consent. How are Senate Republicans and the Trump team approaching this?
That's right. pretty seriously. It is a difficult needle to thread for some senators that have a lot of reluctance, even opposition to some of these nominees. But just a reminder about the Senate's power in general. Think about LBJ back in the 50s. The Senate was the power center in Washington, and it has operated not just as a check on presidential power, but as one of the most powerful parts in our entire governmental system. That is changing right now. No one has wanted more executive power than Donald Trump. I want to look at how the Senate has been losing power recently. Expansions of executive power that we can point to. War powers. We've seen presidents, including George W. Bush, expand war powers, and the Senate, even if they oppose them, not checking them. Executive orders that have become more expansive, and we know it's something that President Trump wants to do, including for mass deportations. The Vacancies Act. President Trump, in his first tenure, had several acting cabinet secretaries as a way to get around the Senate. We spoke with an expert on presidential and Senate power about this. This is Thomas Berry of the Libertarian Cato Institute.
I think we're certainly at a lower ebb than we were in the 60s or most decades in the past.
But where we sit today in November of 2024, would you say that Senate power has been weakened and executive power really has been strengthened?
I would say yes, that at this moment, the Senate's power is fairly weak, given the control Donald Trump has over the Republican Party overall, given the lack of teeth in the Vacancies Act, given even with the recent court decisions, still a huge amount of power in the executive branch. So it will take a lot to push back on that. But certainly standing up to Trump on recess appointments would be a good first start.
So when he says the Senate is historically weak, what does that mean for President Trump's potential effort to bypass the Senate and install his appointees through these recess appointments?
Right. A reminder, this is what Trump tweeted out or put on X just over a week ago, demanding that the Senate leader, now we know John Thune for the Republicans, agree to recess appointments. That's what he wants. But here's what the Constitution says. First, we're talking about Article 2. It says the president shall nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate appoint officers of the United States. Then also in that same article, it says the president shall have the power to fill all vacancies that may happen during a recess. Now, the thing here is that it has not been used in this way. It would take a 10-day recess, and both chambers would agree. If senators don't agree to a cabinet pick, they're unlikely to agree to a recess. That's where it stands right now. It's unlikely they would allow this power.
Okay, Lisa Desjardins, thanks so much.
Welcome.
The day's other headlines start in Ukraine, where Russian attacks have killed at least 21 people in 2 regions. They come a day after PBS News confirmed that the Biden administration's plan to let Ukraine use U.S.-supplied weapons to strike deeper into Russia. In the southern port city of Odessa, a Russian missile barrage on a residential area killed at least 10 people. While in the north, a strike hit a 9-story apartment building in the city of Sumy, killing 11 people, including 2 children. In the meantime, Ukraine's president visited troops in a frontline town in the Donetsk region, where Russia has stepped up its efforts.
The Pokrovsk section is a very tense one. I know that only thanks to your resilience, the East hasn't been occupied in its entirety by the Russian Federation. The enemy gets our responses every day from you and from your brothers in arms. I want you to know that the Ukrainian people are very thankful.
Zelensky's frontline visit comes a day before Ukraine marks 1,000 days since Russia's full-scale invasion. It's now Europe's biggest armed conflict since World War II, with tens of thousands of lives lost on both sides. In the Middle East, Israeli airstrikes pounded Lebanon's capital city for a second straight day. The strikes hit just blocks from Lebanon's parliament and other government landmarks. Israel says it's targeting Hezbollah militants. Health officials say at least 5 people were killed and 24 others hurt. Hours earlier, rockets fired from Lebanon flew over northern Israel, where Israel said a building was struck and 1 woman was killed. Most of the rockets were intercepted. Meanwhile, in Gaza, Palestinian officials say 8 people were killed, including children, in Israeli strikes today. Israel has repeatedly blamed Hamas's hiding among civilians for the death toll in Gaza, which is now nearly 44,000 people, mostly women and children. The ongoing wars in Ukraine and the Middle East are casting a shadow over the G20 summit, which got underway in Rio de Janeiro today. Leaders from the world's top economies are looking unlikely to issue a strongly worded statement on the conflicts amid uncertainty over the incoming Trump presidency. Instead, Brazil's president kicked things off with a focus on food insecurity, announcing the launch of a global alliance to fight hunger and poverty. For his part, President Biden said the U.S. will contribute a record $4 billion to the World Bank's Fund for the Poorest Countries. He also urged member nations to support Ukraine's sovereignty. President Biden is urging Congress to pass nearly $100 billion in emergency aid following Hurricanes Helene and Milton, as well as other natural disasters. In a letter to Speaker Mike Johnson today, Biden said he heard from those affected by the storms that additional federal help is critical. The largest share, about $40 billion, would go to the Maine Disaster Relief Fund at FEMA. $24 billion would help farmers whose crops or livestock were impacted, and $12 billion would be set aside for community grants set up by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Toxic smog is blanketing parts of northern India, where pollution levels are 50 times what's deemed safe by the World Health Organization. Authorities in the capital of New Delhi shut schools and halted construction. The smog is partly due to smoke from farmers in rural areas burning crop waste each year. Cold temperatures trap the smoke and then wind blows it into cities. Car emissions only add to the pollution. Residents say that officials need to take action.
Everyone has a sore throat, fever because of this pollution, and the government should ban crop residue burning. All this is smoke. It's not fog. It's just smoke everywhere. The government should stop crop burning.
Studies have estimated that across India, more than 1 million people die each year from diseases connected to pollution. The CDC and public health officials in several states are investigating an outbreak of E. coli linked to carrots. Officials say 39 cases have been reported so far across 18 states. At least one person has died. The infections are linked to organic bagged whole carrots and baby carrots from Grimway Farms in California. They've since been recalled, but had been sold at major retailers like Kroger, Target, Trader Joe's, and Walmart, among others. The CDC advises customers who have the affected carrots to throw them out and to disinfect surfaces that the products may have touched. Spirit Airlines has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The nation's largest budget airline is still struggling to recover from a COVID-era dip in travel and has lost more than $2.5 billion since 2020. The carrier is also facing tough competition from larger rivals. And earlier this year, a federal judge blocked its proposed merger with JetBlue. Spirit plans to continue normal operations as it works through the bankruptcy process. On Wall Street today, the major markets started the week mixed. The Dow Jones Industrial Average slipped more than 50 points on the day. The Nasdaq added more than 100 points after steep losses last week. The S&P 500 also ended in positive territory. Still to come on the News Hour, how political divisions could threaten press freedoms here in the U.S. Tamara Keith and Amy Walter break down the latest in the Trump transition. And we report from Ghana, a country that's become a global dumping ground for used clothes.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington, and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
President Biden is making his final appearance at an international summit today, the G20 in Rio de Janeiro. And this weekend, PBS News learned the president authorized Ukraine to fire long-range American weapons into Russia, focused on the region of Kursk, which Ukraine seized and Moscow is trying to recapture. Our Nick Schifrin sat down with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan for an exclusive interview this morning to discuss that authorization for Ukraine, as well as the Middle East and President Biden's legacy on the world stage.
Jake Sullivan, thanks very much. Welcome to NewsHour.
Thanks for having me.
2 U.S. officials confirmed to me that the administration has given Ukraine authorization to use ATACMS, the longest range U.S. weapon that Ukraine has in its arsenal. Why have you made that decision?
Well, we don't have anything to announce or confirm on that today, so those remain unconfirmed reports. One thing I would point out, though, for context, is that Russia has just engaged in a massive escalation in this war. They have brought in a foreign army, North Korean troops, to the front lines of the battle, and that represents a sea change in the nature of this conflict.
The Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, today has responded saying that, yes, there is no official confirmation, and if there were, it would mean that there was direct involvement of the United States in the war.
If the U.S. were to authorize the use of any weapon system, including this weapon system, it wouldn't mean direct U.S. participation in the war. It would mean a continuation of the policy we've had since the war began, which is that we supply the means to Ukraine to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and they fight the war.
In and around Kursk, there are tens of thousands of troops being massed to try and retake this territory that Ukraine seized earlier this year inside Russia. There are Russian command and control sites, there are air defense, rocket launchers. Are those good ATACMS targets?
Look, I will obviously defer to the Ukrainians about how they choose to prosecute the war. From our perspective right now, the major escalation that we've seen is not about a particular geography or about a particular part of the front. It's about the fact that Russia has gone to another country from another part of the world, North Korea, brought in thousands of their troops to the front lines and have added them to this war. That is a change, a significant change, a change that in fact we warned the Russians about before they did it and said if they did it, we would respond. And of course, we will respond.
In the past, you've tried to avoid provoking the Russians from escalating at times. You didn't provide tanks, and then you did decide to make that decision to provide tanks. You didn't provide F-16s, then you did provide those F-16s. Do you believe at this point, looking back, if you had provided any of those authorizations earlier, it would have made a difference to Ukraine in the war?
Have we seen a marked difference since we have provided tanks to Ukraine in terms of the battlefield? Similarly on F-16s, have we seen a marked difference? Our view has been that there's not one weapon system that makes a difference in this battle. It's about manpower, and Ukraine needs to do more, in our view, to firm up its lines in terms of the number of forces it has on the front lines. It's about munitions, and it's about all of the other things that go to a country's national strength, their morale, their cohesion, their industrial base.
But I ask because Ukraine is losing more territory today than at any point this year. So do you really believe that nothing the U.S. could have done earlier would have changed that?
We've provided the tanks, we provided the F-16s, we provided the HIMARS, we provided the Patriots, we provided many of the things that you said earlier we wouldn't provide. And it's not back then, it's rather today that Ukraine finds itself in a more challenged position on the battlefield, suggesting that there's not a straight line between those weapon systems and how it does on the battlefield. Where is the straightest line between Ukrainian performance and inputs? It's on mobilization of manpower.
Let's switch to the Middle East, to the latest draft that you guys have been working on in terms of a ceasefire in Lebanon. Has Hezbollah agreed to the draft?
We don't have agreement. If we did, we'd be out announcing it and trumpeting it from the rooftops. But we believe that we're seeing progress, and we think both sides, both the Lebanese side and the Israeli side, have indicated a willingness to get this done and to get it done on a short time frame. So we will continue working at this until we can get both sides to sign on the proverbial dotted line.
You've said that you've extracted further commitments from the Israeli side in the last week about increasing humanitarian aid into Gaza. What are those commitments?
What the Israelis have agreed to do is to create a new route, a new road, to move aid on a daily basis into the humanitarian zone known as Mawasi, where a huge number of Palestinian civilians are currently living. And so we have seen a significant uptick in the amount of aid going day by day into that humanitarian zone.
Those steps that you say Israel has taken have come in response to a letter sent by Secretaries Blinken and Austin a little over a month ago. A consortium of NGOs judged 19 demands in that letter. They say that Israel has substantially complied with none of them, partially complied with 4, and not complied with 14. Given that, how can you really say that Israel has made substantial progress since that letter was sent?
Well, first, as you noted, this is a letter from our Secretary of State and our Secretary of Defense. They will work through a process to make their own judgments, the State Department and the Defense Department, about compliance. What we have seen, and I think this is very difficult to argue, is that since that letter was sent, there has been a change in the approach that Israel has taken on these issues. It's not enough, not even close to enough. So we expect more aid in both northern Gaza and southern Gaza. But the exercise of sending this letter, of laying out the terms of what we expect in a very detailed way, that has generated a change. And that is what American diplomacy should be about. And so we will keep pushing on it until we achieve an outcome in which there is a sufficient degree of sustained humanitarian aid for all of the civilians of Gaza.
You've said you're prepared to work with the incoming administration to try and release the hostages that are still being held by Hamas in Gaza. But can you do that until the Trump team signs a memorandum of understanding that actually officially allows you to share classified information with that team?
So we can't engage in a normal transition until the incoming team signs the memorandum of understanding. But we can have informal conversations with the folks who are coming into our positions. Those informal conversations can help shape a common message that says both the outgoing team and the incoming team are committed to bringing the hostages home.
Last week, the FBI and the Cybersecurity Agency acknowledged a Chinese cyber espionage campaign compromised multiple telecommunications networks, and including information given to U.S. law enforcement under court orders from those telecommunications companies. Does China still today have access to those telecommunications companies and that information?
Well, as you noted, this is an active investigation between the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Department of Homeland Security. But what I will tell you is this is a significant event. The intrusion into these private telecommunications networks that also involve communications on an unclassified level by government officials. So it's something we take deeply seriously.
You say the investigation is ongoing, but is the intrusion ongoing as well?
Well, I'm saying the investigation covers both the question of what's happened in the past and what's happening right now.
Let me ask a question about legacy. Are you concerned that one of your legacies will be facilitating the way Israel has fought in Gaza that has killed tens of thousands of women and children?
The U.S. has taken a very clear position since this war began, which is that Israel had a right to defend itself after the worst slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust. The U.S. also, over the course of the past year, has made a massive difference in terms of whether there would be widespread famine in Gaza or not widespread famine, in terms of working with the Israelis to try to minimize civilian harm over the course of the months of the conflict. I do believe that us standing up for Israel in its hour of need, at a moment when its enemies were descending upon it, has made a major difference for the good from the perspective of the United States.
Do you think the withdrawal from Afghanistan is part of your legacy, and would you have done anything differently looking back?
I believe that ending America's longest war and not passing it on to yet another president is a significant part of President Biden's legacy, and therefore as someone who works for him, as part of my legacy. I would further point out that to date, despite the warnings, we have not seen a deadly terrorist attack on the U.S. homeland while President Biden was president. In addition, we are able to stand up to and push back against Russian aggression in Ukraine to keep Kyiv from falling without having them have sitting ducks of U.S. forces in Afghanistan to go after by, for example, arming up the Taliban. So I think it is a good thing that the United States is no longer fighting in that war, and I believe that that is an important part of President Biden's legacy.
And on Ukraine, do you think your legacy will be defined, in fact, in the end, by your successor?
I believe that our legacy has already been substantially defined on Ukraine, and it can be defined in two words: Kyiv stands. The country was at risk of being wiped off the map, and thanks to the brave Ukrainian people and their resourcefulness and their courage, but also thanks to President Joe Biden rallying countries from around the world, we defended Kyiv, we defended Ukraine, and Ukraine will continue to be a thriving democracy anchored in Western institutions in the future. And I do not believe that anything that comes next is going to change that.
Jake Sullivan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jewish community leaders in the Netherlands are inviting their Muslim counterparts to meet and try to find ways to reduce tensions caused by the war in Gaza. Divisions have deepened there and in France following two recent soccer matches involving Israeli teams. Special correspondent Malcolm Brabant begins his report in Paris.
"You're the terrorists," chant pro-Palestinian protesters, taunting French riot police, preventing them from reaching an international match between France and Israel.
They say they're killing terrorists. They're not killing terrorists. They're killing children, women, and the elderly.
I want ceasefire, of course, but I want sanctions too, because we have a genocide. Actually, we have a genocide in Palestine. So we have to put them in jail.
The massacre continues for 1 year, and now we're dealing with a genocide. The numbers show us something like 50,000 dead, but research by The Lancet tells us we're probably closer to 200,000 dead.
Thousands of officers were deployed to protect Israel's soccer fans. Apart from about 100 most heeded warnings to stay away. Thanks to the police, they chanted after the game. The French operation prevented a repeat of violence in the Dutch capital Amsterdam 10 days ago, when followers of a Tel Aviv soccer team were targeted by pro-Palestinian supporters. Israeli hooligans were accused of provoking trouble by tearing down Palestinian flags and chanting anti-Arab slogans. But the attacks that followed were widely characterized as a hunt for Jews, and community leaders were relieved there were no fatalities.
That really changed my view of this town. I don't feel welcome anymore, and I'm planning on leaving. It's been too much.
Jewish newspaper editor Esther Vogt is worried about her personal security and asked us to ensure that we didn't identify her home.
You can see it as a final straw because already on the 10th of March we had huge things going on here with the opening of the Holocaust Museum, where Holocaust survivors and their great-grandchildren had to pass by very aggressive protesters.
And says Vogt, there have been many other incidents of intimidation.
And nothing was done against it. You know, the nothing is done, that is the scary part.
I think it's just continuing with playing the victim card, right?
Palestinian data scientist Ali Shana has helped to organize some demonstrations in Amsterdam. His family became refugees in 1948, when Israel was created.
The people that we're referring to, while they might be Jewish, mainly they're Zionist, and that's why they're feeling uncomfortable. And in my opinion, and I think in many other people's opinions, it's okay for them to feel uncomfortable if the reason for this discomfort is that they want to stand in support of a genocide and they don't want anyone speaking up against this genocide.
The fallout from the violence almost led to the collapse of the governing coalition, but the government remains under the firm control of right-winger Geert Wilders, who wants to deport those responsible for the anti-Semitic attacks. Berber van der Woede is a former Dutch diplomat who served in the occupied territories and resigned over the Netherlands' Middle East policies.
We have a Dutch government in power that is far right. They really instrumentalized this idea that there was basically a pogrom, to use it as like a stick to beat up basically the Arab communities in the Netherlands, the Muslim communities.
Muslims comprise 5% of the Dutch population. That's about 1 million people, whereas Jews number about 45,000, about a third of their pre-Holocaust strength. This is a place of pilgrimage. It's where Anne Frank hid from the Nazis and wrote her diary until her betrayal in 1944. 80 years later, anti-Semitism has a different face.
Jews are blamed for the bad things happening outside our community. I can't pick up the phone as a Dutch Jew, call Netanyahu and ask him to stop it or to diminish it or whatever. He doesn't pick up the phone.
Community leader Hans Weil believes trouble is being orchestrated by a violent minority and has proffered an olive branch.
There are imams who talk to our rabbis and there are laymen who talk to our laymen. But the problem is we don't hear any sound of, let's say, the leaders of the Muslim community who say, anti-Semitism is wrong. You can't blame Jews in Holland. You can't blame Jews for what's happening in Israel.
Back in Paris, Moroccan-born protester Abdul Karim insists it's wrong to depict the Gaza debate as a conflict between Islam and Jews.
For the last 18 years, there's been a blockade in Gaza. Can you imagine a place as small as Gaza under a blockade? It's not just Muslims who are revolted by the situation.
But the habit of linking all Jews to Israel's actions has exhausted Esther Vogt.
Since October 7th, my world has shrunk. I don't go to a bar anymore. I lost friends, or people who I thought were friends. So you start hiding yourself, and your circle is getting smaller with people you trust and that you can also talk about something else than only this huge problem.
Half a mile away, the base of Anne Frank's statue is adorned with stones, a traditional Jewish sign of respect for the dead. They're also lamenting the return of anti-Semitism. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Malcolm Brabant in Amsterdam.
The day after the presidential election, the nonprofit Committee to Protect Journalists issued a statement warning of a potentially hostile climate for press freedom under a second Trump term. It read in part, legal persecution, imprisonment, physical violence, and even killings have sadly become familiar threats for journalists across the world. They must not now also become commonplace in the United States, where threats of violence and online harassment have in recent years become routine. That's as advocates are urging Senate lawmakers to pass a bipartisan bill that would protect journalists from government spying and other interference. Jody Ginsburg is the CEO of the Committee to Protect Journalists and joins us now. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So your organization and others have raised concerns about what Trump's second term could mean for press freedoms. What are your specific worries, and what have you seen already that gives you pause?
I think we need to think about two things specifically about a new Trump administration. The first is around legal threats, and the second is around regulation. There are many others that we can talk about, but those are the ones I think we really need to be alive to in the second administration. Already in the days leading up to the election, Trump issued a host of legal threats against organizations like the New York Times, CBS, and others. We might expect to see more of that in the new Trump administration. Personal legal cases. He's suing, I think, the New York Times and CBS for $10 billion each. Personal legal threats, but also potentially challenges to pieces of legislation that have for decades protected the press against vexatious lawsuits, like the Supreme Court case Sullivan versus New York Times, which allows the press to publish public interest information and be protected from being sued for defamation.
I want to ask you about a more recent piece of legislation. This is the Press Act, which is designed to protect journalists from being surveilled by federal law enforcement, and it would limit the government's ability to make journalists disclose their sources, among other protections. This bill had bipartisan support in the House. Time is now running out for it to be passed in the Senate. Why is this piece of legislation, in your view, so critical?
It's really urgent that we pass this federal shield law. So some states have these federal protections, which essentially means that journalist sources can't be subpoenaed, information from whistleblowers can't be subpoenaed. It's really important that we have that federal shield law to protect journalists at the federal level. We know that Trump is interested in going after whistleblowers, people who leak, and it's absolutely essential that they are protected and that journalist sources are protected and that journalists are allowed to do their job.
At the same time, I think it's fair to say that journalists and journalism could benefit from some self-reflection, and I say that because the percentage of Americans who say they have a great deal or a fair amount of trust in the mass media has fallen to a record low, according to a new Gallup survey, to 31%. And there are people who say that Trump's decisive win really just is a complete repudiation of the news media. How do you see it, and how can the news media rebuild trust?
I think the news media can rebuild trust by continuing to do what journalism does, which is to publish news and information in the public interest. And while it's true that there has been this drop-off in trust at national level, people remain highly trusting of their local media, which often has the most impact. If you think about it, the information that's provided to you by your local radio station, your local TV station about what's happening in your local schools, what's happening on your local roads, what's happening in the local healthcare system, those are absolutely essential. Those are the areas that have been totally hollowed out financially in recent years. We're seeing so-called news deserts pop up across the United States, which means effectively we have no independent journalists able to hold people to account, able to hold local administrations to account for spending of people's tax dollars, for example. So to rebuild trust, we have to continue to invest in that local journalism because people do trust that and people rely on it.
Finally, I want to ask you about the dramatic rise in violence and risk facing journalists around the globe. A CPJ report says at least 137 journalists and media workers have been killed in Gaza, the West Bank, Israel, and Lebanon since the war started, making it the deadliest period for journalists since the CPJ began gathering data back in 1992. In addition to just the tragic loss of life, what's the material impact of this deadly atmosphere for journalists?
Well, the material impact is it's harder and harder to get information out of Gaza about what's happening, about the impact of the war. There's almost no independent journalists now able to operate freely in northern Gaza, where we know that there has been this program of forced removals of Gazans and what other organizations are calling ethnic cleansing, many human rights organizations are calling genocide. We don't have the journalists in numbers there to provide the information about what's happening. That's why we need journalists. So the impact of this high level of killings, coupled with journalists being repeatedly displaced, facing food shortages, fuel shortages, communications challenges, is seriously undermining our ability to understand what's happening inside Gaza.
Jody Ginsburg with the Committee to Protect Journalists. Thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Let's return now to the presidential transition and some of President-elect Trump's cabinet picks that are sparking controversy. For that, we're joined now by our Politics Monday team. That is Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter and Tamara Keith of NPR. Great to see you both.
Good to be here.
Let's start now with some of the lingering questions over lack of qualifications, some ethical concerns over some of those nominees, everyone from Matt Gaetz, Congressman from Florida, of course, who is nominated for Attorney General, Pete Hegseth, who is the nominee for Secretary of Defense. You both know we're waiting to see if that House Ethics Committee report into Matt Gaetz will be released or not. We don't yet know, but Tam, what do you think? Because Republican senators are saying they want to see it. Will we see it?
Yeah, and Republican senators are also saying he deserves a fair hearing. Well, a fair hearing involves being asked difficult questions under oath with cameras rolling. Now, Matt Gaetz is someone who has proven to have a very high pain tolerance in politics, an incredibly high pain tolerance. He is willing to pick the fights. He is willing to have almost every member of the House openly hate him. He is totally okay with that. He enjoys being sort of a Trump-era supervillain, and he leans into it. So whether that report is released or not, I don't have any great insight. I will say that someone who served in the Trump administration on NPR's air this morning said, you know, Congress leaks like the Titanic. And I think that's fair. Usually things get out. And even if they don't, there is already a huge amount of information in the public discourse about what Congressman Gaetz was being investigated for. And there is already pressure being put on Republican senators to just pass through everybody.
Yeah. Right. Amy, what about that pressure? Because the Trump team insists, and President-elect Trump insists, these are his picks, this is who he wants. Is this a test for senators, and really for Senator John Thune, the newly elected leader?
We are now, how many years into this? We're 8 years into Donald Trump. If you are a United States Senator, a Republican United States Senator, and you haven't already figured out where your lines are that you're going to draw, then that's a problem. It was in 2017, you could be surprised. Oh, wait, what? He said this, he did that, responding to tweets. How am I going to respond to this? How am I going to respond to that? By now, this is all pretty predictable, his unpredictability. And so I think we're going to see a lot of this about picking your fights, deciding which are the things for which you're going to go and either make enemies with Donald Trump or you're going to split with the party, and which things you're going to go along with, even where you might disagree. What's fascinating to me, too, is to watch how Democrats are responding to a lot of these picks as well, where you're hearing people like Senator John Fetterman saying, let's not just go crazy with every one of these picks. You see Jared Polis, the governor of Colorado, having nice things to say about RFK Jr. I think both Democrats and Republicans now coming to the realization that this is about picking the right battles at the right time.
There's also this very real possibility, Tam, that I've been playing it on my head, that the report is released and it doesn't make a difference because we are now living in an era where the president-elect was, formerly bragging about sexual assault. He was convicted, held liable for sexual abuse as well. So are senators here sort of, is there a line, as Amy says here, that they're trying to walk? Do they cede their power if they just kind of rubber stamp everyone now?
Well, I think that the challenge right now is for Republicans who will have the majority in the Senate. Like, Democrats only have so much say here, like none. This is up to Republicans. This is an inter-Republican fight. And it may not be a fight at all, because how much political capital do they want to spend on this
versus
early on?
Something else that is much more important maybe to them or to their constituencies? Going forward.
Let me ask you, too, about where we are on the economy and how people feel about it, more importantly, because we've seen already improving markets. Amy, have now gotten better. They've rallied since the election. There's optimism in the markets that's driven by expectations of lower taxes, fewer regulations. So the vibes have shifted. And there's real-time consumer sentiment that's shifted, too, even though nothing has dramatically changed in the market. Was it just politics all along?
No, you know what? There was a great study by the Michigan Consumer Federation, or the consumer sentiment, looking at, for example, the shift based on, in your opinion as a consumer of the economy, based on your partisanship. Yeah. And the biggest gap that they had measured was right after the 2016 election, where going into that election, Republicans thought the economy was terrible. Democrats thought it was great. By the time we got to February of 2017, it had completely flipped, even though nothing had happened. So partisanship is a big piece of this. But I do also think that so much of the concern about the economy is real and is continuing to be felt by Americans. And the cost of stuff, the cost of housing specifically, being a real weight for voters. Now, there are also plenty of people who don't feel great about the economy, or maybe do feel okay about the economy, who didn't vote. So we can't just look at those folks who showed up and voted as an example of how the broad electorate, or maybe the broad population, feels about the state of the economy.
Tam, how do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's been a long time now that politics basically broke economic perception. And I would take this all the way back to 2012 when I was out in Ohio interviewing voters, and Republicans told me the economy was terrible. Democrats told me the economy was okay. And it was all about perceptions of then President Obama. Well, flash forward, and what has changed since voting happened in 2-3 weeks ago? Almost nothing, except that people who support Donald Trump now believe things are going to get better. Right. They have more optimism than they had before. Meanwhile, President Biden is still in office, so Democratic perception of the economy hasn't had time to turn yet.
Also, I will note that even a good economy for Donald Trump didn't necessarily work to his favor, whether it was in the 2018 midterms or whether it was in 2020, where majority of voters said they approved of the job he was doing on the economy. That didn't help him win the election.
Meanwhile, we're in the final weeks of the Biden administration. Tam, there's a lot of talk about what the president could be doing right now, what they are prioritizing, should be prioritizing to sort of Trump-proof some of what they see as their accomplishments of the last 4 years. What do you know about that?
Well, a lot of what they've been doing for a long time. Yeah. They've been trying to Trump-proof it for literally years at this point. In part because a lot of what the Biden administration has done has been through a rulemaking process. that takes something like 18 months to get a rule all the way through the works. And so one just small example here is that as President Trump was leaving office the last time, they tried doing the Schedule F thing to change the way civil servants were classified, to try to put in more political appointees and fewer civil servants in these jobs. And Biden immediately came in and rescinded that, reversed it, but then they created a new rule. They went through this lengthy rulemaking process to create a new rule to make it harder to go back and do what Trump did before. Yeah. So if the Trump administration wants to undo it, in theory, they have to do their own new rule or legislation, but it's something that would take, again, another 18 months.
Yeah. And they are also on a shorter time frame trying to fill as many judicial vacancies as possible. Remember when Donald Trump came in 2017, there were something like 130 openings and vacancies. Now it's going to be down to the 30s. So there's that. And then getting money out the door, especially when it comes to provisions for clean energy programs that were passed in the Inflation Reduction Act. What Democrats want to do is make sure that money gets allocated and spent, because Trump, as well as Republicans in the Senate, are talking about clawing it back to help pay for some of the things that they want to do, specifically making the tax cuts permanent.
We will see. Amy Walter and Tamara Keith, always great to see you both start the week off with you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
An estimated 20 million people are thought to earn their livelihoods in the global waste industry, collecting, disposing, repairing, or repurposing a wide range of materials and products. But the cost and consequences of handling waste are borne far more heavily in developing nations. In his previous story, Fred DeSam Lazaro reported on the impact of used car and electronic waste imports in Ghana. Today, the waste from textiles. Fred's report is in partnership with the Pulitzer Center.
If you've ever wondered where most of the clothes you took to the thrift store go once they've been picked over, this is one likely destination: Kantamanto Market in Ghana's capital, Accra. I got here at 6 on a Saturday morning and business was already in full swing. As she's done for years, Lizzie Nalturi snipped open a bale of denim jeans. It was fresh off the boat, but a good part of the pile, she said, way beyond well-worn.
All this you are seeing here is trash.
Is it torn? Is it faded?
Yes.
What is it?
It's torn, and some are faded. Nobody buys it.
It's pure lottery. Vendors don't know exactly what they'll find in the bundles they buy from importers of used garments.
Are there some good days and some bad days, or?
They're all the same.
Joyce Asiama is sorting through her own morning pile.
They're all bad.
All bad?
Yes. Look at the colors. It's too black. It's not good. They like the bright colors like this. You have to reduce the price.
You have to reduce the price?
No, yes. See how this one is also. They don't like it.
You're looking for stretch waist.
Yes, stretched waist.
Some days, Nalturi says, she discards up to a half of these clothes.
Throw it to the dustbin.
Throw it in the dustbin?
Yes.
Do you know what happens to it from the dustbin?
Sometimes people will go and use it to set fire.
As fuel?
Yeah, like fuel, yeah.
Fuel for some of the fires at a vast dump site where electronic waste is incinerated to recover metals like copper. But much of the textile waste lands up in lagoons and waterways leading into the Atlantic Ocean, which sends a lot of it right back to shore.
The biggest problem we have is rubbish.
34-year-old fisherman Rahman Bachwaye told us the nets cast from boats here gather a lot of rubbish alongside fish.
Now we are starting collecting the rubbish, putting one side, then we collect the fish to one side.
It's one more headache for communities already struggling with unpredictable weather conditions and large commercial fleets that leave very little for small operators to catch, and fishmongers like Mariam Abubakari to sell.
This is nothing. I mean, she says sometimes you come here, there's nothing and you have to go back empty-handed. Yeah. So she's saying that, I mean, with this situation, how can I make money to take care of my family?
It's very obvious to see all the physical and visible pollution along these beaches with all of the textile waste. What's less visible but equally as consequential is the sheer volume of microplastics and synthetic fibers that is in all this waste, stuff that will never biodegrade.
Essentially now all of the clothes have high levels of polyester blended into them or are 100% polyester.
Liz Ricketts started a non-profit here in 2011, attempting among various efforts to repurpose or upcycle waste, creating new garments or products like this fiberboard construction material. We talked a few days after my return from Ghana.
Our team is removing an average of 20 tons of textile and plastic waste from the beach on a weekly basis. Every single week, that waste is replenished.
Ricketts is American. She spent years in New York and London as a designer in an industry that she says has become a breathless, high-volume business. It went from 2 seasons a year to 5, with garments sewn cheaply in low-wage countries and marketed incessantly, she says.
It's driven on this scarcity mindset that tells you that if you don't buy this thing right now, you are not going to fit in, or you are not going to have that second date, you know. Whenever we feel insecure, we're pulling up our phone and we're scrolling and seeing if there's something we want to buy.
One result, a lot of excess is donated to thrift stores who sell perhaps 10% of it, and their excess is bought by middlemen exporters and winds up in countries like Ghana, which Ricketts says have almost no capacity to recycle.
We're proud of what we're doing, but we're not delusional. There's no way that it can meaningfully scale if brands continue to overproduce, because we will just continue to be buried under a mountain of clothes.
We reached out to the American Apparel and Footwear Association, which said in a statement that the industry would support federal policies and regulations to encourage, quote, textile-to-textile recycling and the necessary infrastructure to support it. Another group, the U.S. Fashion Industry Association, added in its statement, no one in the industry is intentionally making clothing that will go to landfills or to developing countries. They referred us to a group they support called Accelerating Circularity. Formed 5 years ago, it has launched a number of preliminary trials it hopes someday to scale up, promoting a so-called circular economy, more reuse, less disposal, and proper recycling.
Well, the idea would be that it does go somewhere where it's adequately recycled.
But University of California, Berkeley professor Kate O'Neill, who studied the global waste industry, says recycling won't come close to solving the problem.
With fast fashion, you're really talking about how to switch off that tap.
Get people to buy fewer clothes?
Yeah, fewer clothes, better made, have people repair them. But again, it's partly changing people's mindsets.
There has been a shift.
Liz Ricketts senses a shift in mindset, not just among consumers, but the fashion industry, especially given the increasing visibility of the excess, she says, the climate and the environmental consequences.
Most of the brands have said, look, we hear you, and we understand that this is something that we ultimately need to be doing, but they're afraid of being the first brand to do it. This is not something that's going to change overnight.
At the same time, she says she's not calling for a ban on used clothing imports, a trade that employs an estimated 30,000 Ghanaians in Accra alone.
We've had trade in second-hand clothing for ages, for decades.
Micah Nane, an environmental journalist we hired as a consultant, remembers walking along pristine beaches here just 2 decades ago. And like most Ghanaians, his family bought second-hand clothes.
And in the past, it was good business for all the traders and even the general public here. People would go to the market and buy suits that would last for decades.
At Kantamanto Market, Joyce Asiama yearns for a return to that time.
Ghana is not a dumping place. They shouldn't bring it here. We want quality things, nice things, stylish ones.
Some U.S. states and the European Union have begun or will begin requiring garment retailers to collect and recycle used clothes. The system is expected to be modeled after similar efforts at electronics retailers, who add a recycling fee when goods are purchased. Currently, just 20% of discarded textiles are actually collected. For the PBS NewsHour, this is Fred DeSam-Lazaro in Accra, Ghana.
Fred's reporting is a partnership with the Undertold Stories Project at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. And be sure to join us again here tomorrow night when we'll report from a Texas county on the U.S.-Mexico border that voted Republican in the presidential election for the first time in 120 years. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Navaz. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
On an American Cruise Line's journey, travelers experience the maritime heritage and culture of the Maine coast and New England islands. Our fleet of small cruise ships explore American landscapes, seaside villages, and historic harbors, where you can experience local customs and cuisine. American Cruise Lines, proud sponsor of PBS NewsHour.
Supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.